Jesus withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds found out about it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd and had compassion for them and cured their sick. It's the 14th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, the 13th and 14th verses. I remember watching several instructional television programs for children when I was a child that featured a word of the day. While I don't remember the names of the programs, I do remember the way they wove that word for the day through the entire program. Not only were there cool sound effects every time someone on the program said the word of the day, there were examples given for the definition and spelling of the word, how to use it correctly in a sentence, and what that word looks like in real life. Such an integrated approach made it possible to learn more than just how to spell a word and use it in a sentence. It made it possible to learn how to make the word of the day part of my everyday life. And after reading today's gospel lesson, we could say the word of the day from Matthew's gospel is compassion. Compassion is one of those words that we might hear a lot, but can forget its actual meaning. Compassion, for example, can be mistaken for feelings like pity. Now, pity is when you listen to or notice the sufferings of someone and think to yourself or say out loud that you feel sorry for that person. Now, this is not a disingenuous emotion, and it can lead to acts of charitable giving, like making donations to food pantries or disaster relief programs or, other nonprofit programs that help people in need. Now, there's nothing wrong with those actions, and they can help a lot of people, but they do have a shadow side that keeps the giver separated from the receiver. Pity lets you acknowledge another's suffering while keeping one foot firmly in your place of comfort or security. And charity lets you feed another without ever having to share their pangs of hunger or feelings of uncertainty and worry of how they will get out of the situation that makes hunger a regular part of their life. Pity and charity are not bad feelings, and I am not trying to demean or belittle them. They can be helpful in leading to first steps in recognizing the humanity, the need, and injustice suffered by fellow children of God. And therefore, they can be the first steps in making the changes needed to transform lives and our society for the better. My point is that pity and charity aren't the same thing or the same emotion as compassion, which is the emotion Jesus felt in today's gospel and is the same emotion that motivated his presence and his work in today's gospel. The word in the original Greek translated as compassion is a word unique to that language, making it difficult to translate it effectively into modern English. It is a word that can be translated literally as gut twisting, meaning it is a powerful emotion a person can feel in their deepest being, so much so that they might actually feel it physically as well as emotionally. The English word compassion can be defined as suffering along with. And it is worth noticing that in today's gospel, we read that Jesus felt deep emotion, not just positive emotions. He also felt the suffering of others. Notice that he didn't feel sorry for them. He didn't keep one foot carefully planted in the comfort of knowing that he wasn't like those who were suffering. He didn't let anything come between himself and the people he interacted with. especially those who were suffering. And that's important to pay attention to because it tells us a lot about the mystery of the incarnation, of God becoming human and dwelling with us, which is what Jesus is. As the incarnation, Jesus didn't show us a God who is distant and feels sorry for our suffering, but instead is deeply moved by our suffering and feels it along with us. Now we might ask, how did Jesus get to this emotional place of compassion in today's gospel? To encounter a large crowd and feel in his deepest being their pain, their suffering, and their hunger. Well, just before this section of Matthew's gospel that we read today, Jesus had heard the news that John the Baptist had died, that he was murdered by King Herod. This was a deep and tragic loss, as well as an abuse of power and an injustice. And Jesus responded by removing himself from public, by going to a deserted place by himself to pray. Perhaps his time alone was a time to let the loss of John the Baptist sink in, and at the same time to feel the pain of grief. As anyone who has lost someone, whether it was a friend or associate, a spouse or family member, can attest, grief is one of those deep emotions that a person can feel in body, mind, heart, and soul. That is why it's important to give yourself time to grieve and to be gentle with those who are grieving, even if that person is you. And those who have experienced grief might also have experienced how grief can sometimes open your heart and mind to recognize and empathize with others who suffer. Grief might have its time of separation, but it can also be a bridge connecting people together, especially people who share the same kind of loss or suffering. And that's why there are support groups for people with terminal illness or people with loved ones dying of diseases like cancer, and other kinds of support groups. Having a safe place or person to share your grief with can be healing and life-giving, which is perhaps why Jesus emerged from his own time away to grieve with a heart of compassion for those who came looking for him. And I wonder if he thought they must be suffering terribly to go to all that trouble and effort to find him in such a deserted and lonely place. It seems when Jesus looked at the crowd that found him, he felt closer to them. His grief had matured into compassion, and he found himself suffering along with them. To suffer with someone is to give your whole self to them, which is what Jesus did when he healed the sick, and is something I'm sure those who have given of themselves to care for a loved one can relate to. Now, of course, there's more to today's gospel. There is the iconic miracle of Jesus feeding the 5,000. Now, lots of churches base their feeding ministries on this miracle of Jesus, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It is inspiring. But there is more to this story than food. Like the word of the day in the television programs of my childhood, the feeding of the 5,000 is also Jesus showing his disciples then, and those of us who follow him today, what compassion looks like. Perhaps the disciples had seen Jesus' acts of compassion in healing people and wanted to try their hand at being compassionate, to show that they care. So they suggested Jesus send the people away from the deserted place before it got too late for them to get something to eat. Now, this is certainly a hospitable idea. And I love how Jesus hears their idea and suggestion, perhaps recognized the disciples' desire to be compassionate, and takes what they gave him, their idea, and then shows them and us the model for compassionate living. He received their idea, and in a way, by doing so, he blessed it. Then he broke their idea. He broke it wide open and then gave it back to them when he said that the people don't have to leave to get something to eat. The disciples could feed them themselves. And did you notice how the disciples balked when they said they couldn't do that because they had so very little? But Jesus then took the little they did have, like the idea that started this part of the gospel. And he blessed it, he broke it, and shared it. And not only was everyone filled, there were leftovers. And that's the heart of compassionate living. Giving what we have to Jesus, letting him bless it, break it, and give it back to us so that we can share what we have been given. That model works on things besides loaves and fish. In fact, it's what we at Church of the Good Shepherd did with the 100 face masks given to us by Habitat for Humanity. We broke open the packages of 10 masks. We safely repackaged them individually and then put them on the tree of giving, surrounded by the prayers on the votive prayer hill in front of our church building. Now, this wasn't a charitable act. We aren't feeling sorry for anyone. We shared what we had been given because we all must wear face masks when we are in public. And by giving them away, we are showing we are in this pandemic with our neighbors. We really are in this together. And if ever there was a time for compassion, this is it. This pandemic is an unprecedented, weird, and uncomfortable time. It is causing change, and change can bring about fear and grief and suffering. Now, we may not all be suffering in the same way. Some people might be struggling to adapt to all the new mandates, to social distance, and wear facial coverings. We need to understand that behind the so-called anti-mask movements, there may be deep unresolved grief over a loss of a sense of control and comfort as habits and routines and simply a way of life has been changed. And yelling at people to wear a mask or to step back a few feet probably won't change anyone's heart. But who knows what a little compassion might do. Others might be suffering from the actual symptoms of COVID-19, and blaming them won't cure them, but who knows what a little compassion might do. And there are people deeply grieving the loss of loved ones to this virus, and I'm sure it can't be hard to imagine how much they need our compassion right now. And there are some people who are just afraid, watching daily numbers of the infected rise and fall, watching laws and decisions being made, and these changes only increase their fear. How might we show compassion to these fearful? And how might those who are feeling so many of these emotions, frustration and anger, fear, grief, how might you show compassion? I believe kindness is the first step to compassion. This is a difficult time. The word unprecedented keeps being used because none of us was prepared for how to live through a global pandemic. And believe it or not, most of us are doing the best we can with what we've got. We're all struggling. No one knows the right thing to do in every situation. All we can do is learn and listen and try. So whenever and however we encounter one another, let's remember to be kind to each other. We may not be experiencing this pandemic the same way, but we truly are all in it together. And today's gospel shows us the next step to compassion. We can invite Jesus and his godly compassion into all of this by giving him all that we have right now. Our ideas, our materials, our hopes, our energy, our time, our skills, our sense of humor, our face masks, our facilities, our concerns, our love, whatever loaves and fish we happen to have. And let Jesus bless those things. To let him break them wide open and then give them back to us so that we can share them. When we let compassion transform what we have, maybe what seems small or not that much or not enough will become more than we imagined and might be the very thing most needed right now. Amen.